It's spring of 2023, and after a long, dreary winter, the world is finally stirring with life. The newly grown leaves glisten on the trees. The birds chirp, announcing their return to their branches. But best of all, a brand new song from Drake and The Weeknd is taking the internet by storm. Fans everywhere are buzzing about Heart on My Sleeve, praising its lyricism and its catchiness. There's just one problem. They never wrote the song. Instead, an anonymous TikTok user used artificial intelligence to replicate the artist's distinct voices and styles to craft a track that, in the opinion of some, surpassed all their other works. It seemed like something straight out of a science fiction movie. In the comments, the creator issued an almost chilling warning. The future is here. Soon after, the music label that represented both these artists rushed to demand that all platforms take down this fabricated song. The implications of the situation were painfully obvious. If artificial intelligence could replicate the world's biggest entertainers with nearly perfect accuracy in a matter of minutes, what would become of the music industry? What would become of the artists, the consumers? Now, nearly 3 years later, artificial intelligence has only taken significant strides to become even more accurate and even more accessible. As our world enters into this new age of technology, only one question is presented before us. How should society respond? Some suggest a boycott. Others petition for an outright ban. My position is that although artificial intelligence has increased the possibility for right of publicity violations, a federal ban on generative AI would not be appropriate because it would violate the Constitution and conflict with God's design for creativity and human innovation. Now, before we delve into the argument, I first want to clarify a few key terms, starting off with AI likeness generation. It's the process by which artificial intelligence can recreate a person's appearance, voice, and mannerisms. This is made possible through generative AI, which is, quote, a software technology that allows, software technology that allows users to produce various outputs of text, images, voices, deepfake videos, and synthetic data sets, end quote. This includes systems like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Sora, but for the purpose of this argument, I'll be focusing mainly on artificial intelligence and its ability to create media. Now, the right that was historically designed to protect individuals from having their likeness stolen from them is the right of publicity, which, quote, prevents unauthorized commercial use of an individual's name, likeness, or other recognizable aspects of one's persona. It gives an individual the exclusive right to license the use of their identity for commercial promotion, end quote. The baseline protection of this right ensures that a person has complete commercial control over their characteristics as if they were copyrighted. However, due to the accessibility of artificial intelligence, the possibility for this right to be violated has increased exponentially, which may cause serious issues for celebrities who so commercially depend on those distinguishable characteristics. Just as the law adapted to technological phenomena like the popularization of personal computers and the widespread growth of social media, we must also respond directly and responsibly to artificial intelligence. In this speech, I'll first be addressing the threats to the right of publicity that artificial intelligence presents. Then I'll be looking at why existing laws are not sufficient to respond to these issues. Next, I'll be exploring a complete ban and exactly why it extends beyond the government's authority. And finally, I'll be talking about specific reforms we can take to ensure the protection of individuals. Now, my argument today is not that artificial intelligence poses no threats whatsoever. In fact, generative AI directly jeopardizes the rights of individuals with its ability to directly recreate the likeness of whomever the user desires. However, the law does not leave us completely defenseless, as historically, it's recognized the celebrity's ability to control who uses their likeness. Take, for example, Crispin Glover, an actor who refused to reprise his role as George McFly in Back to the Future 2. According to The Hollywood Reporter, he, quote, didn't like the sequel script, and so he threw out $1 million demand to reprise the role. The filmmakers refused, and so they took a face mold of Glover that was created during the first film, hired a different actor, Jeffrey Weissman, and through the use of prosthetics, made it appear as though the same thespian was performing the part, end quote. Glover wouldn't have minded if they had just hired a different actor. No, the problem was that the actor that they had hired was using his face and his mannerisms to make it appear as though it was the same actor. So Glover filed suit, accusing the company of profiting off of his likeness. The courts ruled in favor of him, showing that in an era where celebrities and influencers reign supreme, the distinguishable traits of the celebrities must act as a genuine property right. So if the law affords us such a substantial remedy against this issue, why is artificial intelligence such a problem today? It's because it increases the threats to identities that people have. Unlike the Glover case, most publicity violations today come through photo or video manipulation. You see, artificial intelligence has the ability to create realistic media in a matter of minutes. This ability has only progressed in recent years, and nearly anyone now can use artificial intelligence to imitate the direct likeness of whomever they desire. As Congresswoman Salazar writes it, quote, "Non-consensual voice and image clones can ruin careers, deceive families and friends, and traumatize victims. The American people need clear rules that empower individuals to control their own identity while encouraging innovation," end quote. In a world where no one can tell what is real, the livelihoods of everyone, but especially celebrities, are put at risk. No one will be thrilled to wake up to hundreds of slanderous, fabricated images and videos of themselves on the internet, but that's exactly what's happening today. And this isn't just a personal issue either. It erodes the very trust people place in media altogether. Because of the vast amount of circulating synthetic media online, people simply don't know what to believe. Quote, "Deepfakes can erode the public's trust in videos and images. They can be used to create convincing but entirely fabricated images or videos of individuals, leading to serious concerns about misinformation, privacy, and security," end quote. Artificial intelligence on this matter creates two problems. One, people may be hesitant to believe the truth because of all the lies they've seen. And two, people fall into the deception of artificial intelligence. You see, in order for us to truly combat this deception, we must act immediately and responsibly. And this leads me directly to my second point, that the current efforts to regulate artificial intelligence would fail to provide a correct response to protect the likeness of individuals. To make this argument, I'll be looking at the laws currently in place, the right of publicity, the regulations in the process of being passed, and finally, why any efforts to restrict artificial intelligence would ultimately fail. First, the existing laws cannot account for the issues created by artificial intelligence. In an interview with practicing civil attorney Anthony Severin, I asked him if he thought that the US had enough laws to anticipate the issues created by artificial intelligence. He responded, quote, "I do think there are enough laws, but what we're not ready for is the scale at which we're about to see misinformation and fraud. The problem is that in order to sue every single person that does that, it just doesn't work," end quote. You see, artificial intelligence doesn't create new problems. It simply amplifies existing ones to the level that the old laws which we rely upon are completely overwhelmed. And rather than decreasing the amount of litigations that we can face by strengthening the rights of individuals, the regulations in the process being passed instead attempt to restrict artificial intelligence itself, which is both ineffective and ultimately impedes on free speech protections. For context, Congress is attempting to pass something called the No Fakes Act, which, according to Senator Coons, quote, "The legislation would hold individuals liable for creating an unauthorized digital replica of an individual, hold platforms liable for hosting an unauthorized digital replica if the platform has actual knowledge, and exclude certain digital replicas based on recognized First Amendment protections," end quote. However, due to the risk of litigations that these platforms ultimately face, they would likely lean towards the safer side and remove any kinds of content as long as it's flagged without much review. Without proper guidelines, the social media platforms are what are put at the pedestal to determine what counts as protected speech and not. Even in a world where corporations can determine what counts as free speech and not free speech, this law is ultimately ineffective because it cannot protect us from future threats that stem from new, unprecedented technology. You see, the root problem of the No Fakes Act is that it ignores the core issue that lies at the heart of artificial intelligence, the right of publicity. When looking at the right to privacy, for example, courts have always, quote, adopted higher levels of Fourth Amendment protections for new circumstances to help restore the status quo, end quotes. Courts continuously regulate this right, ensuring that ultimately we're taking power from different parties to ensure even though new technologies are coming out, this right remains relevant. On the other hand, something like the right to publicity remains completely stagnant, making any laws that come out of the current system completely ineffective. Now the question arises, what if we just return to that equilibrium by ultimately banning artificial intelligence? Wouldn't that eliminate the problem altogether? This leads me to my third point, that a federal ban on artificial intelligence would impede on First Amendment protections and ultimately would fail to provide a framework that can adapt to evolving technology. While many people think that a ban would be beneficial, it would overlook the potential benefits that artificial intelligence can provide. Its technological growth, quote, has created excitement about this technology's potential to revolutionize entire industries, such as healthcare, education, and software engineering, end quotes. The applications of artificial intelligence are undeniable, whether with data generation, formula creation, diagramming, and so much more. If developing artificial intelligence progresses, if artificial intelligence is able to boost efficiency in those areas, which it already is, then banning it would ultimately close off those opportunities and only promote stagnancy. On top of these societal restrictions, banning artificial intelligence would also be suppressing this new form of expression. Even for the regular individual, quote, generative AI has opened new worlds of creative opportunity, providing tools that encourage millions of people to explore their own artistic potential, end quote. While AI should never and will never replace human artists, it can definitely act as a gateway for people to enjoy the arts, a pathway for people to pursue the arts, and a tool for people to perfect the arts, end quote. Now, do these benefits that I've just listed outweigh the harms that we've already considered? No matter what your answer is, ultimately, the Constitution would include the creation of media as a form of speech. So banning artificial intelligence now would be the equivalent to uprooting a complete means of communication like digital art, social media, and deepfake technology. Rather than asking whether we want to ban artificial intelligence, we also have to consider the question of whether we desire our government to have the power to completely uproot a means of communication. Ultimately, we also forget the fact that several innovations in the past have led to similar problems. Quote, from the printing press to the internet, deepfakes are simply the next in a long line of disruptive communications technology that can be used to further public discourse. Certain deepfakes will be viewed as on the highest right of public hierarchy of First Amendment values. An outright ban on deepfake technology is not only ill-advised, but also likely unconstitutional, in quotes. See, artificial intelligence has led to countless concerns, but so has past technology. You see, when we look at something like the printing press, it's led to mass unemployment for scribes and spread of misinformation. The internet's problems speak for themselves. But both of these technologies have since been regulated and maximized. So rather than thinking of artificial intelligence as a stumbling block or something that we have to directly combat, we should think of it as the natural next step. Instead of thinking about how we should ban artificial intelligence, we should ask the question of how we can best regulate it. Over this past speech, I've criticized all these potential solutions to achieving protection, and while there's not one single perfect answer, the correct response would involve a series of laws that first define protected speech, then reestablish the right of publicity as a federal right, and finally apply the equilibrium adjustment theory. Our first priority must be to define protected speech. In my interview with Mr. Severin, I asked him about his response to the No Fakes Act, and he responded, quote, I'm thinking about how this interacts with the DMCA, which was one of the worst laws passed in recent memory, in part because it empowers the big guys and completely disempowers the little guys, end quotes. In other words, the DMCA essentially promised harsh repercussions to any company that failed to take down copyrighted media. But because of the vague line that separated protected speech from unprotected speech, these companies often ended up taking down any flagged content immediately. I believe the No Fakes Act will lead to a similar problem, a harsh standard that attacks both protected and unprotected speech. That's why our first priority must be replacing this framework on which we're so dependent on and achieving a framework that addresses the rights that is at the core of the issue today, the issue that past laws have failed to respond to. From that point, we must ensure that the right of publicity becomes a federal right. Only, quote, about half the states have distinctly recognized the right of publicity, end quote. With AI's increasing relevance, it must, to some extent, recognize the individual's ability to control their own likeness. Even if this protection is just a bare minimum, it would provide a necessary legal foundation upon which each state could build upon. From that point, courts can then set precedent on any new or rising issues. As already discussed with the Fourth Amendment, the court uses its judgment to ensure that even with unprecedented new technology, our rights remain the same. It must apply to the right of publicity. Quote, the right of publicity must be further broadened to protect against the generative AI-based misappropriation that the current case law fails to address, end quote. This reasoning, once applied, will ensure that the law essentially becomes a living shield that's able to adapt and respond to whatever issues arise from new issues. By carrying out this plan, we not only uphold the constitutional framework that our nation is built upon, but also God's vision for humanity, to utilize and maximize the gifts that God has given to us. This is illustrated in the biblical principle of stewardship. Quote, for it will be like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent, went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money, end quotes. Artificial intelligence carries both promise and risk. Rather than being like the servant with the 1 talent who buried it out of fear, we must not ultimately restrict artificial intelligence just because of that risk. To strive for progress, we must pursue technology in a responsible manner. To strive for our First Amendment protections, we must adapt this new means of technology. And finally, to strive for the gifts that God has given to us, we must not act out of fear, but out of hope and responsibility. While some might argue that the harms outweigh the benefits in artificial intelligence, and it's worth banning artificial intelligence because of all of these concerns, ultimately disregarding all those benefits, to completely ban a method of free expression stands against everything that our nation is built upon. Without that assurance, we lose, quote, one of the essential hallmarks of a well-functioning democracy. If these legislators wish to successfully address the potential harms of synthetic media, they must do so with the cognizance of the free speech framework and strike a balance between these conflicting policy considerations, end quotes. Regardless of the benefits and the harms, because artificial intelligence allows for the creation of ideas, ultimately the government does not have the authority to completely stamp that out. Others might argue that federalizing the right of publicity would clash with the First Amendment. However, quote, to keep the corporate AI race from becoming reckless requires the establishment and development of legal rules and guardrails, end quote. Before federalizing this right, we must ensure that we have clear standards that delineate protected from unprotected speech. In that case, these rights will not override with each other. It's spring of 2026, and after a long, dreary winter, the world is once again stirring with life. The newly grown leaves glisten on the trees. The birds chirp, announcing their return to their branches. It's been nearly 3.5 years since the widespread birth of artificial intelligence. And though its capabilities continue to advance into the realm of science fiction, life goes on. Yes, there are risks. Yes, there are concerns. Yes, our world has undoubtedly entered into a new age of technology. However, the problems that we are creating through artificial intelligence happen because we now depend on an outdated right. The only future that I'm scared of is one where the government has the authority to completely stamp out a method of free expression. The simplest solutions are not always the best ones. By overlooking all the benefits that artificial intelligence can potentially present, ultimately we're blinded by fear, voluntarily restricting stewardship. We must not live in fear. We must not live in ignorance. We must always strive for the rights that God has afforded to us. Even in a confusing, ever-changing society, one thing must remain steadfast: the rights and the values that our nation was built upon. Thank you.